This one file will make you the laziest programmer because task files are so easy to use and it helps you to wrap a list of actions under one action, which is named a task. Say in a Python project, you always have to execute a list of commands to install your requirements to run your virtual environment, and only after that you could go ahead and run your project, whatever project it is. And with task files, you could just define these actions in one YAML file and then wrap these under one task, and you'll have an available command that is magical. You only can say task run and everything will run for you. So it's going to be very fun to watch this video. This 15 minute I'll cover everything that is important to know about a task file, and so let's get started. So we are going to show how to create a task file by using a GitHub repository that I prepared in advance, and of course the link of it is going to be available in the description so you can follow along. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to bring in my terminal and my desired folder, and I'm going to go ahead and say git clone, and then I will paste in the URL by grabbing it from here and paste this in like that. And that's going to clone the project for me, and this will be our starting point. It is already opened here in PyCharm. Of course, you can use any IDE you want. Right after that, we are going to go to the directory of the project that we just cloned, and we are going to create a new file that will be named taskfile.yml like that. Now, this file has to be named exactly the way it is because that is the way that your IDE will probably recognize that this is a special file that is made for writing tasks. So as we could see, task files are defined inside YAML files, and if that's by any chance the first time that you see YAML files, then I do recommend watching the first few minutes of the following video because that will give you an idea what are YAML files and what are their purposes. Okay, so the first key value that we have to start with will be specifying the version of the task file that we will use, and that has to be 3 because that is the latest version that exists by the time that I record this video. You can see that it still complains about how task file is not complete. This means that we have to go ahead and create one more key value that is mandatory, which is called tasks. Tasks will receive under it a few objects where these objects will be the actual tasks that you want to enable to this repository. And if you go ahead and specify a new key value pair, say that we'd like to say hello, then this will mean to task that your command in the command line interface could be executed with task hello because that is the name of the task. So under the name of your tasks, which you can name whatever you wish, we have to go ahead and define what are the commands that we'd like to execute, and we are doing this with the cmd's keyword, and this has to receive a list of elements. So this means that we have to use hyphens here, and our first command could be echo hello world. Okay, and the second one could be task is amazing. Alright, just pay attention to the double quotes and also pay attention that I'm not doing something meaningful yet, because at first we want to see how it works and what its behavior before we really write meaningful tasks that will be valuable for any repository. So inside the terminal we expect to execute a command like task hello, and it should do the magic to us. But we know that we also have to install the task command line interface in order to make this work. So I really love the Taskfile documentation because they do include how to install tasks for each one of the popular operating systems out there. And since we are using Windows, then it's going to be obviously running this command. Now Choco might be also something that you did not install in your Windows machine. I will leave a documentation how to do that as well. So let's delete everything here and install task by this command. Notice how I am running on administrator mode, obviously because we install a package on our system. So now if we clean everything and we use a command like refresh env, then it should load again our environment variables. I'm doing that for safety, and now task is an available command. So if we go ahead and clean everything and we execute here task hello, then you can see that it works perfectly and we really receive the result as expected. Now at this stage we might want to start writing some meaningful tasks, and obviously this is a Python repository here. It could be any different repository that uses any different programming language, so their task would be different, of course. But when you have a Python project on your hand, then it makes sense to wrap some actions that you would like to do with a Python project, like creating a virtual environment and installing the requirements to the virtual environment, and also running the project and the tests of the project. That's why we also have a test.py file. So let's go ahead and see how we could create meaningful tasks, and along the way we will also see a bunch of additional features that you can go ahead and use inside a task file. We won't cover everything, of course, but we will cover the most useful features that you can use within your tasks. So let's go ahead and start with a new task that we will name setup or build. Okay, our setup will do the actions that will prepare how to run the project for us. So one of the actions that you would like to do with a Python project is to have a command line that will say python-m venv like that. And that is a command that might be familiar if you're a Python developer, because it creates a virtual environment that allows installing the requirements in a separated environment that is instantiated by Python. Alright, so now we'd like to go ahead and install our dependencies inside the created virtual environment, and that is going to be a little bit tricky and is going to be helpful for us to explain more features with the task file. Now we'd like to go ahead to the created virtual environment, and we'd like to point to the pip command line that is inside the virtual environment. And I did actually create one in advance just to show you where it is located if you would really to execute task setup. It is inside venv scripts, and you can see the pip file right here. So this is the pip file that we want to refer to install our dependencies. We don't want to go ahead and directly say pip install-r requirements.txt file, which will be responsible to install the dependencies on our system Python interpreter. We want to use the pip that is by purpose inside the venv folder to install the dependencies only there, only inside the virtual environment. And the way that we can do that is by referring to this directory. So it's going to be venv, and I'm going to use 2 times the backslash because we have to escape 1 time. And then we are also going to refer to the next directory, which will be scripts. And then it will be pip install-r requirements.txt like that. Now, as I said, I created this venv to just show you the file hierarchy. I did not really execute task setup. I did it in the background. We are going to delete it soon and try the whole task setup in just a bit. Now, I do like to add here a command that will look like timeout 3. Basically, this means that hold on 3 seconds before executing this command, and I'm doing this just for having better management between this command to that command, and that's it. Okay, so the next thing that you might be curious about here is the fact that these list of commands will only work on a Windows platform. And this means that if I download this repo and this task file to a Linux environment, then this task file is not relevant and not useful, because not only timeout is not the command to hold on 3 seconds, in Linux we use sleep, but in addition, the venv is created totally in a different way on Linux systems. So this means that we have to tell to this task that the supported platforms are only Windows platforms. And notice how this platforms key receives also a list. We could also tell to a task that it supports both platforms, but in that case it is only Windows. So that's why we also have to go ahead and configure it in that way. Okay, so now let's go ahead and test ourselves here. We are going to go ahead and delete the venv here, and I'm just going to go ahead and execute task setup, and let's see what's going to happen. So the first task is to creating the virtual environment. The second task is to hold on for 3 seconds as it does it successfully, and the third task is to execute the dependencies, which works perfect. Now, in order to completely test ourselves, we could do 2 things. We could go inside a WSL, which thinks that it is a Linux platform, and we could try to execute task setup there. So you will see that this task will completely be ignored because we did specify this platform's Windows here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say task setup. And you can see that nothing should not happen because this is not the platform that is supported. And this is something that is quite nice to have when you work with a task file. Alright, so in that stage we might think to ourselves that we don't quite follow the try concepts. Although this is a concept that comes from programming, but even when we write YAML files, of course we also want to avoid repeating ourselves in some locations. Now you can see that the way that we create a virtual environment is by argument -m, and this is the folder name, right? And we use the folder name again here. So this totally means that we could create a variable that will just indicate the folder name of our virtual environment just to have a better management of our tasks. So it will be easily to change it if we want to one day create a different virtual environment with a different folder name. So I can go ahead and create a variable right under my setup key value pair here. So I can go ahead and say vars, and with a colon of course, and here I can start my variables. I can go ahead and create as much as variables as I wish here. So let's go ahead and use venv folder name, and I'm going to make the value venv. Now notice how I only used uppercase here because that comes from the Taskfile style guides. Okay, that's how they recommend to create variables, all with uppercase separated by an underscore. And the way that we refer to a variable inside our commands is by using a syntax that maybe you did not see before, but it uses 2 times curly brackets and also the dot sign before your variable name. That comes from Golang templating syntax because Taskfile originally has been written with Golang, and that's why we have to follow their templating syntax. And I'm just going to paste in my variable name like that, and that should do the trick here. So I'm just going to copy the exact expression and I'm going to paste this in right here, and here we have a much more readable task file because we have our variable here that is defined. Now we could try to run our task setup again just to verify we did not break anything by referring to these variables. So if we run this, then you can see that we kind of have a problem that reflects about line 6, not finding the expected hyphen indicator. So this might happen due to the fact that we directly refer to variables without using double quotes, especially when the curly brackets are in the beginning of an element. This might lead to a trouble, so it is a great idea using double quotes to wrap your commands in these cases. Okay, but this might mean that we have to escape again the backslash because these are special characters when you use them inside a task file. So I'm just going to repeat myself to again pass them 2 more times, and that will be the final version of our file. Now you can also do it right there, and that should be okay. It should know to still parse this variable just as expected. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. You can see that it still tries to create the venv virtual environment, and that is perfect for us. And it's not going to do really anything special because the requirements are already installed. Now we might also want to create another task for running our tests inside this file here. As you can see, there are just 4 random tests, and it makes sense to also wrap the test execution under a command like task run tests, something like that. So let's see how we can do that. I'm going to go here and I'm just going to go ahead and use a new task. Notice my indentation, how it is just below the setup keyword. So I'm going to go ahead and use run tests, and I'm actually going to use a new line here, and I'm just going to say that my CMDs would like to be, let's take this as an example and we will play with this a bit. So we know that our Python file is actually located here in the directory of our project, but we do want to use the Python that is inside the virtual env. So it is going to be again inside venv scripts, and we will use this Python file. So this means that we have to change this area a bit, and I'm just going to go ahead and use Python tests.py like that. And this will ensure that it will use the Python that we just set up from this task. Now I'm going to go down below and I'm going to again use platforms, Windows, and that will be it. Let's go ahead and see if that works nice. So I'm just going to go ahead and say task run tests like that, and you can see that it fails. Now the reason that it failed is because, as you can see here, we don't really have a reference to the venv folder that might be expected, But actually, if you remember, we said earlier on that the variables that you create under a task are only going to be available within the scope of the task. So this means that VN folder name is not accessible under the run tests task because it is created right here. So this means that we have to move this to a global place. And I'm just going to cut this from here, and I'm going to create this right below the version and above the tasks. This way, these variables, let's fix the indentation of course, this way these variables that are created here are going to be available across all the tasks. So let's go ahead and try to run this again, and you can see that it runs perfectly. Our tests are passed, and this is actually a great way to wrap the test command execution in that way. Now, another thing that I like to do in this stage is to define a dependency to this task. And it makes a lot of sense because you cannot execute your tests if the setup did not work yet. It quite makes sense, right? You don't have the setup of running your test or your project at all, so it makes sense that you don't want to make the run test to be executed if the setup is not ready. So the way that we can do that is by going here and define a list of dependencies, and that is called deps, just a shortened way saying that, and this knows to receive a list of tasks that are defined within this file. So if we create setup as a dependency, then this will ensure that no matter when you execute run tests, this will also run. Okay, so let's see this in action. I'm going to, by purpose now, delete our virtual environment. Okay, I'm going to go here and I'm just going to execute rmdir /s/q venv. Okay, and this will be responsible to delete everything. As you can see here in PyCharm, the virtual environment is gone. And now I'm going to go ahead and say task run tests. And you can see that the setup runs earlier on, which is perfect. And now that this is completed, then again we execute our tests just as expected. So using dependencies in your tasks is a very valuable thing that you want to do. Alright, so these will be the list of topics that I wanted to cover in a task file. These are the most useful and the most important in my opinion. Obviously there are tons of more options, and I'll link the documentation of how to use a task file in the description. So till my next video, be sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing my channel for more content like that. And that's it. See you next time.